The sustain pedal's great, it adds so much colour and depth to our playing, but today we're going to be living dangerously. We're going to be breaking the rules on the sustain pedal. It can be overwhelming when you first start using the sustain pedal, or you start using it in a different way. So before we break the rules, let's make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to the fundamentals. That is your setup, the fundamental exercises, how the pedal works, and notation. If you're already super confident about these, then jump to section 2, where we cover 5 key principles based on a piece of music by Chopin, arranged by Liszt. And finally, we're going to take our fundamentals, destroy them, and break some rules. The pedal that we're talking about today is called the damper pedal, or you may hear it called the sustain pedal. And the way that it works is, as you press the pedal down, it lifts the dampers off the strings and allows them to vibrate. The way I like to think about pedaling is really this controlling of the dampers, how much we lift them up and how much we let the strings vibrate. Unfortunately, pedaling isn't just as simple as holding the pedal down throughout the piece that you want to add resonance to. And the reason for that is that not all chords work well together. For instance, if you take a C major chord and you add a D flat major chord to it, they will clash pretty horribly. So instead, one general rule would be to change the pedal on each change of chord or harmony. But that doesn't really tell us how to pedal. So let's go through an exercise which is going to tell us how and when to change the pedal. So this first exercise is about legato pedaling. And what that is we're trying to achieve legato, which is these smoothly connected sounds, but instead of doing it in our fingers, we're going to do it using the pedal like this. So our sounds are connected, but we're taking our fingers off. We're not playing legato with our fingers, it's all happening in the pedal. This exercise can take a little bit of practice, so don't worry if you don't get it the first time. But the way it works is, we're going to take our 5-note scale again, and we're going to start on C, and we're going to hold C, and then we're going to put the pedal down. That note is now being sustained in the pedal. Now when we play our note D, we're going to lift our pedal up, and then we're going to put it down again, still holding our finger. Now we're going to take our finger off. As we play note E, we're going to lift the pedal up, down, and then we're going to lift it off again. All the time when you're using the pedal, keep your heel on the floor, and it's the ball of your foot, not your big toe, that you want to use. So let's go through that again. We're going to play the note C, put the pedal down, lift our hand up. Each time we play a new note, we're doing an up-down with the pedal, and then we're taking our finger off. So we're going up, down, and then finger off. 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 And we can carry on like that. The next exercise would be to take the same exercise but use chords with it. So for instance, we could take a C major chord. Then we put the pedal down. We're going to lift our hand. As we play the D minor chord, we're going to do an up, down, and then pedal it off. Up, down, and then pedal off. And you can hear that the chords are being connected together as though they were being played legato. Now for a little bit of fine-tuning. I did say to lift the pedal exactly when you play the new note, but in reality it should be just slightly afterwards. Let me explain what I mean. So if we play a C, and then we play a D without changing the pedal, we have a big overlap. Now I'll change it, and it gets rid of the C. So we had a big overlap between notes. If I did the opposite of that, and I lifted the pedal too early, so I'm going to play the C, lifting early, then we had a gap between the notes. So it's about judging when you lift the pedal. And perhaps the best time to change it so that we don't end up with too much blur or a gap is just ever so slightly after you've played the new note. So for instance, we'll play the C, then we'll play the D, change. We don't change exactly when we play the note because we might end up with a little gap, but this is really about judging it with your ears. It's about listening out and hearing how big that gap is or how big that blur is. We don't want too much blur, and we certainly don't want a gap, because then it won't be legato pedaling. Now you're ready to start doing this in your pieces as well. Now there are a few different ways of notating the pedal on the music, but the easiest to understand and read is graphical pedal notation. And that's where you have a horizontal line denoting that the pedal should be held down, and then a little arrow going up and then down again, showing when you should change the pedal. I like to call this an up-down because it's when you lift your foot up and then you put it back down again. And you can see this on the graphical pedal notation as well. You may see other types of pedal notation that are harder to interpret and slightly less clear, like the more traditional ped sign, which indicates that you should put the pedal down, and then the asterisk for when you should lift it back up again. The graphical pedal notation that we mentioned before that, though, is much clearer to read and easier to interpret. Now that we know how the pedal works and how to read pedal notation, let's apply it to a piece of music. And here we have Spring by Chopin, arranged by Liszt. Now, there are some pedal markings on this edition of the music, but they're not my favorite. They're not the most clear. And when I checked two other editions, the pedal markings were completely different and they suggested doing different things. So what do we do in this situation? Fortunately, my first pointer is that we don't necessarily need pedal markings, and they're not necessarily written. Or the composer has just written something like con pedal or use the pedal. So what we can do, or a good starting point, is just to take what we had earlier, which is to change the pedal on each change of chord or new harmony. So let's try that. Let's try changing the pedal on each new harmony or chord. And I've just realized that it says una corda here. And the una corda is for the left pedal as well. So my second pointer is to practice legato, and that's because it's so easy to cover up slightly messy playing or a few mistakes with the use of the pedal. So if you practice legato first, any playing that you use the pedal with, you should practice without the pedal to begin with. Think of this as like a blank canvas to which you then add the pedal. Before we jump into my next pointer, which is about avoiding the bang, if you feel as though your practice isn't as well-rounded as it could be, that is, you're not focusing on everything that you should be in a practice session, then use the practice routine that I've been using for years. It helps you to structure your practice, comes with loads of book recommendations, and it's available from the link in the description below. The next point is about avoiding the bang. Now, what I mean by this is when you change the pedal, you do your up-down and you lift your pedal. If you lift it too quickly, you allow it to come all the way up, it's going to hit the felt stopper and create a clunk. Let's see if we can hear it. That kind of clunk. Now that happens when you just lift it all the way. So what we can do instead is just bring it slightly below that and we won't hear anything at all. If we let it go all the way up, then it's going to create that clunk. So avoid, listen out, and avoid that clunk. So here are 3 rules to break. Now this will ruffle some feathers, yes, but the first rule to break is ignore pedal markings. Now this does come with a small caveat, but Chopin and Liszt, our composers for today, both suggested that the piano pedal requires continuous learning. But the question is, how do we do that when our notation is so limited? The problem that we have is that there's no way of writing those finer details of pedaling on the score. So even if you follow what the composer or the editor wrote, then that's only going to get you so far. Not to mention the fact that how you use the pedal will change depending on the piano that you use and the room that you're going to be using it in. The style of the music will also determine how much or how little pedal that you'll use and which level of pedaling that you'll use. So what are these levels of pedaling? Well, here are the primary 3. So there's full pedaling where the dampers come completely off the string, and that's for when you want the full effect of the pedal, when you want the strings to resonate the most. There's also half pedaling where you press the pedal part of the way down and they only partially come off the strings. This is when you want some dampening effect to take place. Then there's quarter pedaling where you only just touch the pedal and it just lifts the dampers ever so slightly, allowing a touch of resonance. And this is when you really want just subtle effects from the pedal. There are arguably more levels than this, but an exercise I like to go through is to play a very full chord and then gradually lift the pedal up, and you can hear the different levels of the pedal. You can hear more and more cutting out. It's really hard to bring the pedal all the way up in one movement very slowly. So instead, think of bringing it up a little bit and then down, and then up and down, and up and down, and up and down, and up and down. And that way, you can hear those different levels cutting out. I would certainly recommend learning as much as you can about the pedal and about the pedal markings before making the bold move to ignore them. It's really a case of learning the rules before breaking them. My next rule to break is not necessarily about pedaling, but it's about your note lengths. So what we can do is to gain more clarity in your music is to actually hold the bass notes down. Now this piece is a fantastic example of that because it actually suggests holding the bass notes down as much as possible. For instance, it holds this G, holds the C, and what that means is you don't need to use the pedal as much. Now you can use that kind of effect even when it's not written. This is called finger pedaling. And what the rule that we're breaking here is how long the note should be held down for. But the reason we're doing this is to gain more clarity and actually use less pedal. The last rule that we're going to break is all to do with the thing that we've been avoiding all the way through. And that is this dissonant blur between notes. But the question is, what if that's what the music calls for? What if you want some blur in your music, a little bit more dissonance? This is sometimes called dirty pedaling, and it can add a lot to your music, especially if you've always followed the rules. But be careful, because it's dangerous, and there's a fine line between something that enhances the music and something that's chaotic, muddy, and murky. Something that we talked about earlier was covering up tricky or fast passages by using the pedal. Well, if you want to play faster with more clarity, then check out this next video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.